Welcome back to another episode of the Barbecue Booze and Life podcast. I am your host, George, and if this is your first time joining us, this podcast is about the art of barbecue around the world. And it's something that I started to just learn more about barbecue and to share my passion of the art with y'all. In this episode, we're going to head to Kansas City. But before we get started, I just wanted to share a funny story because I, as you all probably already know, a common theme in barbecue is ribs, and Kansas City is a place that is well known for its ribs. And I recall as I was getting ready to come home from some time overseas, my father asked me, he goes, "George, is there anything you want to eat when you get back?" And I said, "Yeah, I want some ribs. Can you make some ribs?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'll make some ribs for you when you get back." So my first home-cooked meal back in Texas was some baby back ribs, and my father managed to burn them. I mean, those things they were burnt to shit. And as I'm eating, I'm thinking, this son of a bitch burned the ribs. And he looks at me and he goes, "Hey, how are the ribs?" I said, "They're burnt, Dad." He goes, "Oh, it's a new smoker. I'm working my way around the new smoker." So that was his excuse. Which is true. You know, if I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. If you do get a new smoker, you do get a new grill, you got to learn your way around it first before you start making anything. But he should have done that before I came home. So as I was talking to some friends about episode 5, about talking about Kansas City barbecue, one of my friends said, and I quote, "Kansas City destroys Texas on barbecue." And shortly after that, he died in a car accident under mysterious circumstances. So, may he rest in peace. No, he didn't really die. That's a joke. But that's what he said. He's a Nebraska transplant and managed to taste some Kansas City barbecue. And he said it destroys Texas barbecue. I also have another friend, and I'm not going to share their names, but I have another friend who spent some time in Missouri and was eating barbecue, tried a couple of places in Kansas City, but since he didn't know what side of the river he was on while he was eating, he didn't know in which state the good barbecue existed. Which, fun fact about the Kansas Cities is that, if you didn't already know this, they are both separately incorporated, but together they make the entire Kansas City metropolitan area. So they are both well known for their barbecue traditions, and really the only thing, and it's something that we're going to cover here in a little bit, really the only thing that sets them apart, like anywhere else, is the style and technique that each establishment uses. Okay, so there's a very deep-rooted history of barbecue in Kansas City. It's a large part of their culture and culinary traditions, and and a lot of what you hear about in this podcast, and we're going to go over it here, is we're going to go over the history of barbecue in Kansas City. Then we're going to talk about the rubs they like to use, their sauce, the popular types of meat, and the technique that they like to use while they're there. And one of the things that you've probably already picked up on is, in a lot of slow cooking, there's Czech and German influence. But in Kansas City, the traditions are rooted in also African American culture. And so when we talk about German and Czech migrants, we're also talking about African American migrants to the area. So in the 1920s and 30s, that's when you started to really see the emergence of barbecue joints in Kansas City. And they were mostly operated by African American pitmasters. They were very popular social hubs. It was just a place where you could go and you could get some really good food to eat. So one of the more notorious, and also the gentleman they consider as the father of Kansas City barbecue, and arguably the godfather of barbecue in general, is Henry Perry. And he's credited with establishing the first barbecue restaurant in the early 20th century. One of his proteges, which also is a very popular restaurant in the area today, his name was Arthur Bryant. So you can also go to Bryant's Barbecue today to eat, And in the 1930s, Arthur Bryant opened his own barbecue joint, and it became just as popular as Perry's joint. And it was not a competitive relationship, but it was just a way to share their joy of barbecue. So over the years, over the last century, you just see the styles change and the way they cook and the adoption of the dry rubs and the sauces and the use of various hardware. You start to see that evolve. So much so that Kansas City has essentially become the hub for barbecue competitions. That further solidified its reputation as a barbecue destination. Now, it's a place that I have not personally visited yet. Shame on me. And it's somewhere that when I'm in the area, I would really love to go and try out some of these restaurants, because I do hear good things about Kansas City barbecue. And starting the show has helped evolve my opinion and knowledge. And I realize I've been shortchanging myself. So one of the more popular events that you can find in Kansas City is the American Royal World Series of Barbecue. And there's pitmasters from around the country and more than likely the world that come there to showcase their skills. And I hope to make it out there for that one day. So let's talk about their dry rub. As we talk about dry rub in this podcast, you start to see slight variations depending upon what region of this country you're in. And in Kansas City, a real popular blend of spices. Again, it varies, but the more popular blend is brown sugar, paprika, garlic powder, onion powder, cayenne powder, black pepper, and sometimes mustard powder, which is something that we'll talk about when we get to the Carolinas in episode 6. So with the dry rub, especially with the larger cuts of meat, you want to be very generous. And this is something that they picked up on in Kansas City. That's what helps gives it the crust. And it'll help penetrate the meat during the slow cooking process. Now, what I've come to notice is, yes, there is a caramelization of the sugars, etc. But I've noticed the amount of black pepper helps a lot with the crust. And I've seen that sometimes when the when the rub lacks black pepper, you don't exactly get that bark that you really desired. So if you couldn't already figure it out from what I just described, a sweet and spicy blend is very popular in Kansas City, very popular with their style. Now for the sauce. So there's base ingredients for the sauce, okay? And then the sweetness and the tanginess and the spices all depend upon where you are. But the base ingredients for their sauce is tomato based. Sometimes it's ketchup or it's just straight up tomato sauce. Now, Kansas City barbecue sauces are known for their sweetness, okay? And that usually comes from the brown sugar that they add to it, or sometimes you might find molasses, honey, or there might be some wild man out there that puts all three of them in there. Okay, now to balance the sweetness, they might add a tangy kick to it, which is usually will come from vinegar or Worcestershire sauce or Worcestershire or Worcestershire, wherever you're from and however you pronounce it. It's the W sauce. All right, now some of the spices that they'll add to their sauces are usually the same spices that they add to their dry rubs, which will add to the sauce's depth and complexity. And we're talking about garlic powder, onion powder, mustard powder, and then the additional spices that are used really depends upon the establishment you may be visiting. Now, someone out there correct me if I'm wrong, but the commonality in the sauces that you'll find in Kansas City is that they're thick and sticky. Everyone calm down. Okay, we're just talking about barbecue sauce here, all right? So the Kansas City sauces tend to be thick and sticky, which helps adhere to the meat during the cooking process. So when is the sauce usually applied? The sauce is usually applied at the last stages of cooking. So the reason why I think it's important to wait till almost the end of the cook is that you might risk the caramelization turning into a burn, and you don't want the sugar to over caramelize that's in the sauce. And then it's going to burn, more than likely harden over your meat. And, your guests are just not going to like that. And if they're honest like me, they're going to let you know. So together, you really get like this combination of sweet, smoky, and savory flavors that really define the city's distinctive barbecue style. And you can, to me, it sounds kind of dramatic, but it's like you're almost tasting history. And hopefully I can make it out there sometime to give it a shot. So let's talk about some of the key characteristics of the Kansas City style barbecue. We've already talked about the rub. We've already talked about the sauce. Well, let's talk about the type of meats that are popular in that arena. So it's a wide range of meats. It's not what I found unusual in my research was sometimes you find lamb or turkey in Kansas City, which I don't know why I thought that was odd, but you would think that they would stick to the usual beef, pork, and chicken. So as I mentioned earlier, the meats are slow cooked over a variety of hardwoods, such as hickory, oak, or fruit woods, depending upon the type of meat that are cooking. So that's what, and we've mentioned it in other episodes, that what gives the meat its distinct smoky flavor. All right, another thing that was popularized in Kansas City, and you've probably enjoyed them yourself, are burnt ends. If you've never had the burnt ends, you're really missing out. It's something that's really popular right now is something referred to as poor man's burnt ends. You see it a lot with pork belly or chuck roast. And what people are doing is they are cubing, they're smoking, or with the pork belly, it's cubed first, smoked, and then it's finished in this tub of sauces to help replicate the burnt ends that you would get from a normal cook. And the chuck roast is supposed to represent the burnt ends you would get from like a brisket. They've gotten real popular. It's actually very economical to make, especially if you don't want to pay for a brisket or some large cut of pork. You could get the pork belly, which if you haven't tried it, it's actually really good and you should give it a shot. I've failed several attempts at the chuck roast. I'm still trying to get that right, but I see guys on YouTube do it and it looks really good. And so basically what happens with the burnt ends is Kansas City has popularized caramelizing and saucing them to give it that extra burst of flavor. So on the brisket, it's usually from the tip, not the flat side, but from the tip, they'll cut off the top, and that's where they get the burnt ends from. So they've popularized that out of Kansas City. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the accompaniments, but there really wasn't anything that stood out as unique for the area that you wouldn't find in other parts of the country, just like coleslaw, baked beans, potato salad. What I did see that was suggested as an accompaniment that you don't typically see like in Texas is French fries. Yes, you can get French fries, but it's not necessarily a staple side in Texas. Okay. Now, there's a few places that I wanted to cite as kind of iconic barbecue spots in the Kansas City metropolitan area. And the reason why I wanted to point these out is because these are the top 3 most popular places in Kansas City. And the first one being, which we've already talked about, was Arthur Bryant's, kind of the man who popularized barbecue. And that his restaurant still exists today. It's a legendary barbecue joint known for its rich history and classic Kansas City style barbecue. And it's a must visit if you go to Kansas City. Now, there's a few up and coming spots. Actually, one that I pointed out. But first of all, we're going to talk about Joe's Kansas City Barbecue. So Joe's Kansas City, which was originally known as Oklahoma Joe's, is celebrated for its burnt ends, its ribs, and the brisket. It's a very casual place to go and hang out, and the quality of the meat has really become renowned around the nation and has gathered lots of acclaim. Now, the last place I want to talk about is Q39. Of the three, Q39 is a newer place and it's more innovative. They have a more modern take on barbecue. They combine a lot of the traditional Kansas City techniques with some of their new innovative flavors, which means, they're including different spices that wouldn't be common to the local area. And reading about it, it's really got me excited to try it. Okay, so you could find a lot of inventive side dishes they have, a lot of house-made rubs, and it's a popular choice if you're looking for like a contemporary barbecue experience in the Kansas City metropolitan area. All right, I was very excited to talk about Kansas City because Kansas City was really something I personally didn't understand. So I hope you learned something new today. I hope you like what you hear. If you enjoyed today's episode, I hope you stick around for episode 6, where we're going to head to the Carolinas to talk pigs and mustard. So if you like what you heard, please give me a follow and a subscribe. You take care of yourself and grill on.